Hello there, friends, and maybe some of my family. We are on our way to becoming a better Position 5 hard support player here in Dota 2. In my tryharding opinion, the game begins as soon as we press accept, all the way until one of the ancient falls. I mean, that seems a little obvious, but I think sometimes people don't take the draft phase seriously. They're kind of tabbed out doing other stuff. But that part of the game is when we should be already thinking about how we're going to win, how we're going to play our lanes, that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to be covering today, from pressing the accept button to when the game actually loads in and we can move around our hero. That's the draft phase. Now, funny enough, we're not actually going to talk that much about drafting, because we're the Position 5 support player. What that means in pub games, I've already said this in one of the previous videos about developing our hero pool, we don't actually do that much drafting. We just pick our hero first. That's kind of the Position 5 life, and you kind of just have to accept that. Sometimes you may pick, say, second because your Position 4 picks first. Maybe you have someone who really wants to play a certain core hero that they think is busted, so they insta-lock that in. Either way, we're probably picking one of the first three, and very often we're picking the very first time. So I really don't feel the need to talk actually that much about drafting, but this draft phase time, since we're not spending it thinking on drafting, we should be thinking about other things, about this lane matchup, like I said, about how the overall game is going to go. So that's what we're going to be discussing, starting with the lane matchups here. The first thing we need to do is to categorize our lane as being strong, average, or weak. And then we're going to do that for the enemy offlane as well. And once we know, let's say we have a strong versus strong lane, I'm going to have like this sort of a flow chart to suggest how you're going to play the lane overall. But before we can get to that, we need to think about what our lane is. So the two considerations that are over there, that way, is securing last hits and kill potential. Those are the overarching themes of a lane that determine whether it's strong or not, right? If you, like, when I say strong or weak, I'm sure you're thinking of some heroes naturally, like Ursa, strong laner. Why? Because he can kill you, and that is scary. And when he can kill you, it helps him secure his last hits. Versus, say, Drow Ranger. I mean, she has some kill potential because she has that slow, but overall, it's not as likely she's going to kill you. But because she's a ranged hero, and she has decent damage once she gets a couple levels, like, her securing last hits is okay, but I would still put her on the weaker side because she doesn't really have as much kill potential. Well, maybe she's more like average a bit. But anyways, keep those two in particular in mind when you're trying to decide if you're strong or weak. Now, if we think about the actual draft phase, let's go by just assuming that we pick first. So we should know our own hero. You should know whether you are a strong, average, or weak laner, or what situations make you, like, in which. So, for example, I played Jakiro. After a lot of Jakiro games, I would say that Jakiro is overall a pretty strong laner, maybe between average and strong, where I don't really see him having too many weaknesses because he has really good stats, he has pretty solid spells. His two biggest weaknesses are that he's on the slower side and that he has a pretty short attack range. And yeah, I feel that sometimes where, like, I distinctly know those are my weaknesses and I can feel those come into play. But overall, those are not the worst weaknesses to have when I have good stats and good spells. Compare that to, say, Crystal Maiden, who is a very fragile hero, which means the enemy team can kill her very easily if they get on top of her. So that usually pushes her towards being a weak laner. But if they don't have a way to actually get on top of Crystal Maiden, then her spells are actually pretty good. They do a good amount of damage. They can secure range creeps pretty easily, something Jakiro cannot do very well. And because her spells have a slow and a root, that can actually set up kills pretty decently. So if the enemy team doesn't have a way to get to Crystal Maiden, she kind of moves up to being like an average to strong laner. And knowing those nuances is something you should know about your own hero. If you didn't watch the previous videos, I suggested only trying to play one hero at a given time, like focusing on that hero really well, getting to know them very well, and then you can move on to the next one if you really want to develop a hero pool. But at any given moment, try to be playing one hero so that you can develop this feeling of, I'm a strong laner in this situation, or you see certain heroes and decide, oh, I'm kind of weak in this case. And once you know your hero, the next thing you're going to see is probably the 4 position. They usually pick second. So you would immediately think about the 5 to 4 matchup, because oftentimes supports play not in the lane, but like a bit to the side usually. And a lot of times they just harass each other, maybe someone tries to do a pull, the other person goes to intercept. The 4 position and the 5 position, like, they play around each other a lot. So we want to know that one-on-one matchup. Can this 4 position just kill me? For example, the Crystal Maiden versus Clockwork. Clockwork has a very high chance of just killing Crystal Maiden because she's so slow and so fragile. Whereas Jakiro, I might take a good amount of harass, but I'm probably not going to die to a Clockwork in a one-on-one match. So you want to know how that feels. Next, you're probably going to see the offlaner. You don't necessarily need to think about that one-on-one match, like the 5 position to the offlaner, because that doesn't happen as often. Like, the offlaner is usually going to be in the lane or doing something, and they don't usually just come fight you, the 5, one-on-one. So that part you don't need to know as well, but I mean, it doesn't hurt to know it, if you want to think about it. Then the carry will usually pick 4th or 5th. Wherever they pick, that's when you want to start thinking about, okay, what is the carry versus offlane matchup? They're the ones that need to get last hits. They're going to be sitting in the lane. That's where they're most likely to hit each other. So how does that go? Who will come out on top? Can they kill each other? Which way? And once we've thought about all those one-on-one matchups, and in the same way, the carry often doesn't need to be directly compared to the 4 position, because again, that's just not very common where you have a one-on-one between the carry and the enemy 4 position. Then you want to compare the 2-on-2. So now that we know who's going to be in the lane, if we both sat in the lane and maybe got into a fight, what happens? How does our carry and 5 support combo compare to their offlane and 4 support combo? Do we win trades? Can we get away if they go on us? Which way? Then we move on to the 2-on-1 matchups. So for example, enemy 4 support might be a roamer, so they may head to the mid lane to try to gank. Now that it is the carry and the 5 support against the offlaner, how does it go? Can we kill them now? Are they at risk of dying? Or maybe they're not. Maybe they're like a Legion Commander or an Abaddon that are very hard to kill. So if we don't think we could go on them, for example, then that's going to affect what we do. So for example, I might say, we can't kill them. I'm going to go focus on pulling. Or if we can kill them, I might say, okay, let's go kill them. That would be great. That kind of decision is good to know ahead of time, and this is kind of what we're thinking about in the draft. Again, just to cover them all, I did put the 2-on-1 against the 4 support enemy. It's not that common to happen because usually the offlaner is the one that sits in lane. The only reason this might happen is if the enemy offlaner got wrecked or got killed and they just left. They went to the jungle or something. Usually that's very good for your team, and so you don't really need to think about this 2-on-1 matchup because it's we're probably winning. If the enemy offlaner is not here for an extended period of time, this is probably really good for us. So I don't really think about that too hard. Then we have the enemy 2-on-1, so the offlane and 4 support against just the carry. For example, if we, the hard support, went to go pull, can they kill our carry? Will he take a lot of damage, or can he just get away? What's going to happen? Then the other side of that, say the same pulling example, maybe the offlaner and 4 support chase us. Are we going to die? Can we get away? It's pretty unlikely that you would win that trade, right? With the 5 support out trades the offlaner and the 4 support, but you can think about it in terms of how much damage are we going to do to each other. So for example, maybe they were both low. So usually you wouldn't win the trade, but I mean, if you can output just a bit of damage because they're so low, maybe you're safe. Knowing all of this stuff determines whether your lane is strong, average, or weak. And you kind of want a good idea of this before the game. This is why you want to understand your hero, and to an extent, you want to understand as many heroes in the game as possible. So understand what makes anti-mage good or bad. Understand what Spectre makes, what makes her good or bad. The more heroes you understand that for, the faster this process will go, so that in the draft phase, you just see the hero and you can spend a bit of time thinking there, but you know that, okay, this guy's kind of strong in lane, so matched with me, this is how it goes. Or you see an enemy offlaner, you think, this is how my matchup goes, this is how their matchup goes. The more game knowledge you have about specific heroes, the easier it is to make all of these connections very quickly. Having considered those different matchups, you will now have this idea of our safe lane is strong, or average, or weak. Same for the offlane. I will say, before going into it, usually whether you're a strong, average, or weak lane is determined by the core. So for us, if the carry is strong, usually the lane is strong. And for the offlaner, if the offlaner is strong, usually it's a strong lane. Because really, like, say you have a Medusa as your hard carry. What 5 support could you possibly pick to make this like a strong lane? Like, whoa, this Medusa might kill me. Oh, it just doesn't really happen. Whereas Ursa, like, he's a strong carry. It doesn't really matter what position 5 he has. It's going to be scary. Obviously, some are much better. Anyone who has a stun or a slow, that is way better than, say, like a Bane who doesn't necessarily have a way to set up for Ursa. Um, but still, Ursa is strong, so like whoever you match him up with is just going to make him stronger or like a weaker form of strong. So it's usually the cores that determine it, and then they're enhanced by whatever corresponding supports they have. And then the next thing I'll say is that if you're uncertain what the enemy offlane is going to be, so for example, like you're pretty sure they're going to have a Sand King offlane, but then you're not sure who's going to be the 4 or who's going to be the 5, for example, and who might show up in your lane. Assume the worst. So assume whichever combination is the strongest. So one combination is strong, one combination is average. Just prepare for the strong lane, because if it is, you're fine. You're prepared. And if it ends up being the average lane, you may be a bit over prepared, but it should work out for you. It should be okay. So generally, go with the worst case scenario, unless you're really confident that they're going to pick the average combination. If you feel that way, go with it. Just know, like, if you're wrong, that could hurt you, and that, maybe you can do some middle ground preparation if you aren't sure. Finally, third thing I just remembered that I want to say, do attempt this categorization. So maybe you're not sure whether a lane is strong or not. Just give your best guess. I think this is really good for learning. So for example, if you say, I think this lane is strong, and then it turns out you're right, then like that's great. You correctly identified it, and you'll remember that you did so. Now, if you say they're strong, and then they turn out to be very weak, you're wrong, but that's okay, because in your memory, you'll remember thinking, I thought they were strong, but actually they were weak, so now I remember that they're a weak lane. That works out for you. Whereas if you do not make that initial categorization, I think it's harder to remember. Like you'll say, I wasn't really sure about that lane, and then when you try to think about it, you'll think, I think they were strong? I don't remember so well. I think making that initial guess and then being right or wrong is a good part of remembering this in the future to help establish that game knowledge. So I really do recommend, even when you're not sure, take a guess. It's fine. It's just a game, guys. You can be wrong. It's okay. So finally, let's talk about it. If you're in a strong versus strong lane, you end up with really heavy fighting usually, because both sides are kind of meant to get kills. So for example, let's say you have Ursa and Shadow Shaman in one lane. Like Shackle into Ursa Fury Swipes, that is scary, usually ends up in kills. And Ursa, not necessarily the best farmer, so he wants to get these kills. Now, a lane like Centaur Snapfire, also a pretty strong lane. Anytime you have 2 stuns on a team, Centaur's got high damage, Snapfire has pretty good spells. In this particular matchup, I might give the edge towards Ursa and Shadow Shaman, but like again, anytime you have 2 stuns, that can be very scary. So if they start getting kills, I could see them taking the lead. And it ends up being a bit volatile like that when you have 2 strong lanes, because neither side is necessarily meant to just catch up by farming. They're meant to be in the lead. So you end up with a lot of fighting, and usually whoever starts taking the lead keeps that lead and snowballs it a bit. So this lane can be pretty tough, and that's why I think it's really important to identify, so that way we can prepare for it. Usually it involves buying a lot of regen so that, if you lose a trade, you can quickly get back up to full health, try again. Now, any of the matchups that are only one level apart, so strong to average, for example, or like average to average, average to weak, any of these, I don't really care that much about, actually. Because usually, even if you're meant to win a lane, but the enemy team's not that much worse, they could still win by outplaying you or getting a bit lucky. A lot of things could happen when, it's not that different of a lane. So really, in those cases, we're just going to play the lane out to the best of our ability and hope, not just hope things work out. We're going to try to make things work out. But ultimately, it doesn't usually take a lot of special preparation. It's these extreme matchups that are usually the ones that matter. So then when we have a strong versus weak lane, so strong safe lane versus weak off lane, we really need to win that lane. Usually when you're a weak lane, you plan on just catching up, plan on getting farm. You don't need to do well. So it's really important not to let them do well. If they start off doing well, that is usually very bad for you. So usually what this means as the position 5 is that we cannot let them pull. Pulling is a way to get back into the game when direct laning is not an option for you. So let's say you had like a Ricky Grimstroke lane. That's pretty strong, and you can easily kill the enemy team. Once they're dead, you control the lane. Anytime normal laning is happening, that's usually good for you because you can get kills. So like let's say the enemy is like Pango and Pudge. That's not a very good lane. They don't want to have a normal laning stage because they'll just keep dying and they won't get a lot out of it. So they want to do some pulls, make the lane a little weird so that they can start to get XP and you don't get to just like fight like you want to. So when that happens, we really don't want to let them do that. So for example, if this was the case, I might say we really want to start with a ward. We really want to do something to make sure they cannot take control of this camp and make sure that we can keep the lane in the way we want it to be. Now, if we move down to a weak safe lane versus a strong off lane, this happens a lot because offlaners tend to just be good in the early game. It's kind of like their thing. And hard carries tend to be weak in the early laning stage. Like, that's just their thing. That's usually how it goes. So when you're very weak, though, like, say, Anti-Mage, Spectre, Medusa, you want to make sure you can pull. So this is the reverse of that previous situation where we don't want a normal laning stage because the enemy team will just kick our butt. They are just stronger than us. So like if we are Anti-Mage and Ancient Apparition, we're just not that good at laning. We're pretty weak compared to like, let's say a Beastmaster and Lina lane. That is terrifying. Lina lands a stun, you're probably just dead or like at least half your health is gone. So in those cases, we don't want AM to just have to sit in lane usually and fight. So we want to pull a lot and try to control the lane in our favor. And naturally, they're going to try to stop that. And it's in these cases where maybe you need to start with the sentry because if they block your pull camp, you're in a really bad situation. So this is how it's starting to shape our decisions. And then in a weak versus weak matchup, this is now the flip of the strong versus strong matchup, where both sides tend to just want to farm, and it actually usually isn't that volatile because like you're just farming. And even if you get the lead from farming, you usually just continue farming with that lead. And both sides just try to farm up as much as they can. This kind of lane ends up usually being pretty boring for the position 5, I think, because you're just like, hey man, keep hitting those. Way to go. You got those last hits. That guy got some last hits too, but that's a lane. You just watch him last hit. Usually you can leave this lane pretty early, but we just want to make sure that we can definitely farm, because if they farm and we're not, that's bad. I mean, obviously that's bad, but like it's really bad in this case. Yeah, let's move on to the next part. I lied. There's a couple more things I need to say. The strength of your lane, or what your lane is supposed to be, is pretty consistent. Like, it doesn't really matter what you face. Ursa is meant to be a strong lane. But his relative strength to the enemy, like your matchups, really matter. So against an enemy offlane Venomancer, Ursa is going to be really bad against that because Venomancer's ranged, all his stuff slows. It's just a really rough matchup for Ursa. Ursa still supposed to be a hero that has a strong start. Like, that doesn't change. But he is not going to have a strong start versus Venomancer. Like, he is not a strong lane. I would say he's actually now in like a average to weak lane, and Venomancer is a very strong lane. This can be really bad for your team because a big part of the typical usage of strong versus weak lanes is that strong laners very good at the start and then fall off, whereas weak laners are meant to be weak and then get strong at the end. That overall holds true. So if you're meant to be strong and you're not, when are you going to be strong? Not strong when you're supposed to be, so like that's not going to change. This is when you see pro teams like swap lanes around, excessively so sometimes, to the point where I even question if it's worth it. But apparently it happens, so I guess they really care about the matchups that much. We don't have to worry about it that much because we're pub players. So like realistically, even if you see an Ursa into a Venom matchup, like the smart thing to do would be to swap the lanes around a bit. The pub players tend not to even think about it, or like they tend to be very uncomfortable with it. They try to swap, but then they don't know how to do it. And it's just, sometimes it's just better to play out a really bad lane. This is the limitations of playing pub games. Be aware of it, know it. Sometimes you can't actually do that much about it. Sometimes it just ends up being this like draft loss. It doesn't necessarily reflect you as a player though, so like we don't want to stress out about something we can't change, so there's that. Second thing I wanted to say is that these laning matchups are very much meant for the first 5 to 10 minutes of the game, and they will determine our starting itemization, our early itemization, that's the next video, some of our early decisions, but it doesn't necessarily determine the game. So sometimes it does, like if I have a Spectre in my lane, she's probably the game winner, so we're going to consider that a lot, not just in this lane matchup, but in our overall game sense of who's going to win. However, sometimes it doesn't. So like our Ursa, strong laner, but say we have an Alchemist mid. Alchemist, actually our game winner. So we're going to play for a strong lane, but some of our decisions are going to actually start to focus on, okay, how do I enable Alchemist to win me this game? That's also part of what we're thinking of in the draft. So we're determining our lane matchups, and we're determining our overall game plan. Who will win this in the late game? Who will win this? Like, are they strong enough to just end early? These kind of considerations are going to play a part in our choices, but usually the first like 5 to 10 minutes of the game are kind of the same regardless of how the game is supposed to go overall. So like even if you're in a weak lane or a strong lane, you kind of need to do the same stuff regardless if your laner is going to win the game or not, but it's still something to consider because you might make some slight changes later on. We'll get into that at that time. So there's not a lot of time in the actual draft phase for me to talk, so I'm going to explain a couple more things beforehand, and then I'll show an example clip of exactly what we're going to do in the draft phase. So first, if you didn't watch the previous videos, I recommend making a page like this. So usually you see this when you load into a game, but you can make your own pages, and I recommend you do something like this to have the hero you're going to pick, some common bans, and the rest, honestly, whatever, it doesn't matter that much. Once you load into a game, I say hello to my team, just like start it off friendly. You don't have to do that, but I do recommend, honestly, I'm going to recommend it. I think it's important. Be nice in your games. It's good. If I get a team that says hello back, I have a better feeling about the game. And if no one says anything, I'm like, oh, okay. I do think it's very beneficial to be friendly and start the game off on a good note. Then you're going to check the enemy teams for any hero spammers. If you recognize any of the names, this may not be so applicable in lower levels because you tend to play a bunch of new players every single game, whereas the higher you go, you're more likely to see some of the same players. There are some websites that will tell you who's a hero spammer. I don't really use any of those, so I'm not going to encourage it or condemn it here because I don't have any experience with it. But if you know someone is likely to spam a hero, I ban that hero out. And otherwise, I ban something that I don't like. So, for example, Rubik. Anytime I play Jakiro and I have no spammers to ban out, I ban Rubik because I don't want to play against Rubik. And if Rubik has already been nominated to be banned out, you could just move down the list. But honestly, I don't really care anyone else besides Rubik, so I just, whatever. And then I pick Jakiro. The rest is pretty much just going to be what I talked about before, where we're going to see the format, or we're going to see who gets picked in the 5 position, the 4 position, the 3 position. At that point, if you're pretty confident those are the 3 and the 4 that have been picked, that's pretty much who you're going to be playing in lane, and that determines some of the starting items you're going to get. Itemization will be later, the next video. I'm sure I've said that plenty of times at this point. But essentially, once you know your matchup that you're playing against, you can start thinking about like what I said, where it's like, okay, the 1v1 versus the 4, 1v1 versus the offlaner if you want, and then the two of them versus just me, like how does that work? That may start to affect some of your decisions on what you want to buy at the start. And at this point, you probably have not seen your own carry pick yet, so you're not fully sure what they might do. But I'm going to hop into a bot game to show how I start thinking about the individual matchups for myself. So here I am. I'm going to pick Jakiro. And you'll notice that you can see your stats here. After you pick, you can come back to this screen, maybe go to the other one that has all the heroes. And you can, if you're not sure about any stats, check here. I mean, you should know your own hero already, the general. Like, I don't know these numbers specifically, to be honest. But I know that my armor is like decent at the start. I know my attack damage is relatively good, that kind of thing. But say you see the enemy team pick a Clockwork and you're not sure, like, oh, is Clockwork faster than me? I don't quite remember. You can come over here, come over to Clockwork, look at his stats here, and then know, like, oh, he is much faster than me. Perhaps I could buy a Windlace at the start, and that might even us out and balance us if he does not buy any movement speed either. His armor is similar to mine, a little lower, so I actually win out in terms of a right-click war, and my damage is a little better too. And obviously I have range and he's melee. So I may not mind trading right clicks with this guy as long as I don't let him get close. Thinking about this kind of stuff as we see heroes is what we want to do. Let's go ahead and pick Zquixotix. The only other thing I really need to explain to you at this point, two things. First off, whoever your mid laner is, give him 2 tangos. You can do this in the game as well by pressing control, hold control, and then whatever tango button, whatever your hotkey is, onto the hero. You should just do that. And then the other thing is, in this screen, you can click these portraits and check their stats as well. So see like what their starting armor is, what their move speed. In this case, like here, he has a lot of armor. That might surprise some of you. So knowing, I always check for armor and movement speed if I don't have a good idea of what it is already. That's generally what I look for. During all this, you don't have to do anything besides continue to think about, like, if you're not sure what exactly your itemization should be, that is all just thinking time to me, is what I'm doing. That's a lot of it. I will now probably put that clip in. So here is that replay. This is actually from the game I played to get Immortal. I had this recording, which will work out really well because there's really not a lot of time in the draft phase. So this way I'll be able to pause and explain a little bit more. Once a game loads in, first thing, wait for it to connect. There's, nothing to do at this stage, really. So I'm going to get ready to ban Rubik, but first we're going to check if I recognize any names. I don't, so I just ban out the Rubik. Now at this point, you just wait. There's really, no heroes have been picked. There's nothing to really discuss at this point. Here, I now pick in my Zquixotix because I'm confident first picking this hero, and we get to see the Bane. So my first thought is that I have been making some mistakes against Bane recently when I was playing Zquixotix at this point, in that frequently I use Ice Path to stun several heroes in a team fight. But Bane, his Fiend Grip, it's really important to cancel that. And if there's no one else on my team who can do it, then I need to be thinking about doing it. And several times in some of my games, I was not doing that. And then my Ice Path was on cooldown. He was getting a full duration grip off, which was really hurting us. So that's what I thought when I saw him, is that I need to be prepared to cancel that. And that maybe I'll buy a Yule's as a secondary way to cancel Fiend's Grip, just to give myself some options so that if I really do need to use Ice Path, maybe I can still cancel it. But hopefully my team will have a way to deal with that, but we're going to see how that plays out. We're just going to keep it in mind. Now we can keep going. I like to put the heroes where I think they're going to be on the map. Not because I can't remember it, but because maybe my team's not thinking about it. So to just make it clear to them. Technically they can't even see this page until they actually pick their heroes, but I think it's just a good way to kind of plan it out as I'm thinking. Here's me saying hello. Usually I do this right as I load in, but I kind of forgot this time because I wasn't sure if we'd connect. Now Tusk is another hero I was making some mistakes against, where I was not respecting him in the lane enough, the power of icicles to block me off, because Zquixotix is usually hard to kill, but Tusk was, in a couple games I played, Tusk was getting kills on me and I was not having a good start. So when I saw Tusk, I was remembering that, thinking, okay, I need to make sure I respect the fact that he can icicle me off of my way home, but that outside of that, trading is okay. That, as long as he doesn't get on top of me too easily, in a 1v1 direct trade, because I have dual breath, it's not the worst. So I need to be very conscientious of my positioning in the lane. Pretty confident Tusk will be the 4, Bane will be the 5. In this case, it's very easy, so I don't have to think that hard on it about, if it was going to be ambiguous. See the Mars on our team. I do think a little bit about the combination. So when I see that, I'm thinking like, oh, Terrorize plus Mars ult. That's quite nice. And like, oh, it's easy to place my abilities in Mars ult too, which is convenient. Downside of these two heroes is that Dark Willow has no instant way to cancel Fiend's Grip. Spear can be difficult to cancel Fiend's Grip depending like where you are on the map. So I am like realizing, okay, I may be the one who has to cancel Fiend's Grip. We may need to keep that in mind. Also, thinking about later in the game for Tusk, I'm okay playing against Tusk in the late game because usually he's not going to focus me as a position 5. He's going to go on someone else, maybe try to save people with Snowball. And if you see where Snowball is rolling, you can place an Ice Path and get everyone stunned who's in the Snowball when they pop out. So like that direct matchup is okay later in the game. I just need to be careful in the laning stage. Here I get to see the enemy offlaner. So now this is like what I was saying. This is the 3 and the 4. I now know the lanes. So one-on-one versus Tusk is okay as long as I can be aware of the fact that I might get trapped by icicles. But if it's just Tusk, that's probably not enough to kill me. But Tusk plus Bristleback, that will definitely get me killed if I get trapped by icicles. So now I need to be really careful. Bristleback in particular of all heroes will... I always like to buy a stick against Bristleback if I'm confident he's going to be in my lane. He's one of the only heroes I think warrants that and makes it worth it. And at this point, I guess that's it. I'm feeling okay. Like, none of these heroes necessarily scream very strong at the late game. So I'm thinking, okay, like, Bristle can have a very good early game, but if we get past that, you know, he's not the worst late gamer, as long as he's not, like, rolling out of control. And I quite like our start, too. So I'm feeling okay about this going into the late game. So we can see I start to buy some of my items now that I've seen a couple of my picks. Now, I don't like when my team loses gold, but there's nothing I can do to control that. In my opinion, I think he should pick because he already knows his offlane mashup. Now, once we see Ursa, we don't directly need to think about Ursa, but like in terms of our lane, because Ursa's not going to be in our lane. But thinking about the game, AM, I thought AM was a good pick against these 3 because, you know, these 2 don't really provide... He definitely provides no lockdown. His lockdown is quite... it's like not guaranteed, where, yeah, he can snowball on you, but it's very easy to shield that, and the snowball stun does not last very long anyways. And then he has Ice Punch, but again, doesn't last very long, and it's not a big deal. Bane is a little scary if you can get the full Fiend script off, but a good AM will very frequently get the spell shield off on time, or at least know to get out once spell shield is down. So I felt good about those 3. Now, once I see the Ursa, I feel even better, because Ursa also does not have lockdown. He does buy an Abyssal and a Basher, which could make an issue later in the game, but in terms of thinking about the game as a whole, like, AM wins this game late against all of these heroes, in my opinion. So I'm feeling very good. I'm thinking, okay, I just need to get a good start for my AM here, make sure we can get going. We are a weak lane. Well, I'd say AM is like average to weak. It's kind of weird. AM wants to be a very heavy farmer at the start, but with his mana burn, it's like it's not actually that bad. It's not that weak. And especially against Bristleback, who really needs to cast his spikes. I'm forgetting the word. His quills. If he doesn't have mana for that, he's actually quite a weak laner. That is a big part of his laning presence. So AM is actually pretty good against that. So I'm okay leaving him 1v1 because he'll always just blink away if he's ever at risk of dying. So even though AM is historically on the weaker side of laners, like in this lane in particular, looking pretty good because Tusk also does not have the crowd control. They can't stop him from just blinking away. The one-on-one matchup is decent. The Tusk versus AM matchup is decent. Now, I don't particularly do great against Bristle in a one-on-one because I have no way to get rid of Quills and I'm a slow hero, so I can't be too out of position this game, especially with the Tusk. And then in the 2-on-2, if they focus AM, again, he's not likely to die. Even with both of them, he can just blink out as long as he's not too low on health when the fight starts. As long as he's at a fairly healthy level, the 2-on-2 fight here is pretty good. They're both melee, which means they both have to run into him. That makes landing dual breath very easy for me. That makes my ice path easy to land. My liquid fire is likely to hit both of them. That makes trading pretty good for me. And if they go on me, I might die, but AM can just farm after that because they'll have used a lot of their spells, a lot of their mana. So it's like, oh, I died. Okay, AM, you doing okay? It's fine. So I just want to play like a bit conservative with my positioning, but I'm okay with this because if I'm in the back and it's just 1v1, like that's good. So here we are. Now that I know AM is going to be the game winner, like I don't really tell my players what to pick unless they like ask, and then I'll give some recommendations. But because I know AM's going to be my game winner, I just want someone else who will also make space overall. And so I thought this was perfectly fine pick. Now that we see Lina, I don't think she's the best against AM. Like she does have a stun, that's true. And she does output a lot of damage, which can be quite scary. And in fact, if I recall, this game, Lina was a bit of an issue. But AM as a whole loves playing against intelligence heroes. And like when he gets a BKB, it's going to be pretty strong against this. So my thoughts right now are that we win this game late. I just need to do whatever I can to make sure we have a acceptable start, because this is technically a strong offlane. This Bristleback and Tusk, that is a strong lane. So if I'm quantifying it, I'd say they're usually a strong lane, but a little weaker against AM specifically. So I'd say they're like average. And our lane, usually supposed to be kind of weak, but I'd say we're actually average against these heroes. That's pretty good for us because, like I said, usually we're supposed to be weak. They're supposed to be strong. So the fact that we're both starting off average is already in our favor. And I know, okay, AM's weak. You're going to see here. Let's play it actually. So I had these items because I know I want AM to farm. I need him to be healthy enough. Like I said, as long as he's healthy enough, he won't die. So I get the salve to make sure he's not going to sit too low for a long time. I can just heal him up if I need to. You always have to buy at least one set, in my opinion, because we're going to give 2 to the mid, and usually we're going to buy a second set, but right now I'm just holding it to see the rest of the draft. Again, I already explained the stick. So now that I'm thinking, okay, we just need to win this lane, I buy another set of regen, because like if I'm too low, then that's not great. Because I do want, like, even though I said AM is unlikely to die against these two, like, let's say they go on him, he gets away, but he's low. So now, like, he can't go up again, because if they do it again, they will actually kill him. So I do need to be there to be helping him out. So I want to have enough regen. And then I buy a sentry because, like I said, I want to make sure I can control the lane by pulling. So it would be really bad if they blocked the camps at the start for too long. So I want to have a sentry ready right from the start to make sure I can keep the lane the way I want it. And then that's all my money, so I don't really have to think that much more. I don't strictly feel like I need the ward. So I'm kind of leaving it open to see if the offlane wants it. If they don't want it, I'll take it. But I'll usually wait until the game goes in. I think that's all. I don't think I actually have to say anything else about this draft. Yeah, you'll see no one took the ward, so I ended up taking it. This is now going to get into like the actual future videos. So I think that's going to be it for this video. Yeah. I hope you learned a bit about drafting, how you should think about lanes. Come back next time, and we're going to talk about itemizations. I can't remember if that lane went badly. We won this game, though. I got Immortal. Woo! Hopefully you can too soon, following this guide. Whoa. All right, thanks.